Hello and welcome along to our conversation on AI and policing, from experimentation to real-world impact. I'm Gary Craven and I'm Head of AI Strategy and Transformation for Shopper Stereo. Now, the conversation policing has moved beyond whether AI has potential. The challenge today is how we move from experimentation to operational impact safely, responsibly and at scale. Recent developments such as the launch of Police.ai signal a clear ambition for AI to become a core capability across policing. Yet we see forces continue to grapple with familiar issues. How do they identify the right problems? How do they test and evaluate solutions effectively and safely? How do they know it works? And how do they build public trust? And really importantly, what do they need to do to scale successful approaches across policing rather than those isolated pockets of innovation? I'm joined by a fantastic panel of speakers who bring all of those perspectives together. Daniel Stewart is an AI project manager at Netherlands Police, bringing nearly 2 decades of experience with the Dutch National Police Force. He established the AI Lab and project team in 2021 and now leads a multidisciplinary team developing AI systems that are compliant and responsible by design. Professor Barak Ariel is a professor of experimental criminology at the University of Cambridge and a leading international expert in evidence-based policing. Research focuses on policing, crime prevention, and the practical application of technology to improve policing outcomes. Tanya Shackleton is a product manager for the Stormcat system within Shopper Stereo's public safety group, supporting over 30 UK police forces. Drawing on more than 25 years of frontline policing experience, she has led major control room technology initiatives, including an AI pilot for post-call analysis. And last but not least, Craig Dibden is the head of consultancy for the public safety group at Shopper Stereo, and he brings over 30 years of policing and leadership experience. Following a distinguished policing career, he now helps public safety organisations address operational challenges by harnessing technology innovation. So why are we here today, and what's important about this discussion? The UK's police reform white paper marks the biggest shift in policing in nearly 200 years, and among the white paper's most significant initiatives is the creation of Police.ai, a national centre to accelerate the responsible adoption of AI across 43 forces in the UK. And that's backed by over 150 million of funding over the next 3 years. And part of that will include the inception of a national AI lab for policing, which is a proactive support to model solutions for key policing challenges, coordinating testing and implementation. And there's a growing demand for improvement in productivity and efficiency. They've got the ambition of trying to free up the equivalent of 3,000 extra officers and putting them back where they belong, in the heart of our communities. And they're already seeing impacts in terms of catching offenders and speeding up investigations. But the challenges are there in terms of fragmented innovation, siloed adoption, trying to improve that public trust, and the need for evidence-driven adoption. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's jump straight into it. First topic we're going to focus on is solving real policing problems. Craig, I'm going to come to you first. From your experience in policing leadership, what are the biggest operational pressures that AI could generally help address?
Yeah, morning, Gary. Morning, all. I think just narrowing it down to two or three is quite hard, because I think there are different ways of approaching it. You've got if we were to bracket it, I would say you've got the priority at the identifying the opportunities to harness AI to enable frontline officers and staff to be able to operate more efficiently and effectively. So, i.e., improve productivity. They're using AI and other tech solutions to protect the vulnerable, so identifying those helping us identify those most vulnerable and protecting them sooner, and that goes the two aspects of that are then also those that present the greatest risk of harm, and identifying that group and using harnessing that opportunity to use AI to do that. And these are all things that have been discussed nationally already and are part of the Police.ai future. I think there's also other opportunities within AI as well, which get talked about less, I think, but are from my experience, are equally relevant and also yield significant benefits at the front end if done properly. And they are, I bracket those into some of the what would normally be called the kind of the back office functions. And I think it's very easy to underestimate or indeed sometimes completely ignore the impact that some of the back office functions have on operational delivery, by enabling us to understand how many officers we've got, how many staff we've got available, where they are, how deployable they are, and have an accurate representation of our available resource, is really something that I think there's a real opportunity for. So so that kind of finance systems, HR systems, duties management systems, harnessing AI to streamline them so that data is clean and is able to be used really quickly and really efficiently and effectively, so that forces are able to have a up to the minute picture of their available resources, skill set, deployability. I think that's really important, because in my experience, it's not something that is currently being used to its best effect. I think we've got the increase in digital data over the last 20 years is massive, and there's a lot of catch up to be played on that, because the digital, with regard to digital storage and devices that have grown and grown and grown in their memory, how much they store, and the prevalence of those devices throughout our society. So how we can help automate triage and digital evidence analysis, I think again is something that's been mentioned before, but is really high up on the list of priorities for police.ai. And from a SOC Prosteria perspective, focusing on how we can work with other partners to help do that, I think is really important. Administrative relief, I think, how we can, it goes to the back office support, but it also talks to report drafting, and the amount of time that officers and staff take to on report writing and report production in any way, shape or form, or just maintaining the systems is huge. And so officers will be out on the street responding to incidents and or investigating crimes, investigating incidents, protecting the vulnerable. They then need to come back or utilize their mobile data to input a lot of that information, and that can be a really really time consuming effort. And so focusing on that, I think, is really important. And probably, I'll take a pause there, but control room optimization. I think there's something that brings us back to SOC Prosteria and Storm, and how we can optimize force control rooms to help prioritize deployment, emergency calls, 101s, triage those, identify risk, summarize, and take a lot of the time and duplication out of that. And that's something obviously that's very, very important to us within SOC Prosteria right now. So I'll take a bit of a pause there, Gary, but that's kind of just some initial thoughts.
No, some great thoughts, Craig. Tanya, you've worked in command and control environments for 25 years. Do you see similar opportunities to improve frontline effectiveness and officer experience using AI from your perspective?
Absolutely, and I'd echo what Craig said there around time. I think is the biggest operational challenge. It's that winning back people's time so that they can focus it in the right place and be more public facing. And certainly one of the biggest challenges, one of the other things in my portfolio was the risk management triage system that the control room staff used. And at the moment, they will make a risk assessment on a log, which then determines how quick that response should be. They will do that by checking intelligence systems for previous intelligence calls, etc., from that person to get that sort of overarching picture. But the intelligence doesn't end there. It doesn't end in what's on the intelligence system. It's also how many calls have we had? Has that frequency increased? Does this therefore suggest that there's an escalation of a situation that might increase our need to respond more quickly? And I think that is quite labour intensive And at times of peak demand, it's very easy to miss some of that detail. And I feel like that's where AI could play a significant part of bringing that into a tidy bundle so that that person knows, can fact check, yes, I agree, and move on and put their focus on deployment, keeping in touch with victims, etc. So yeah, completely agree.
Thanks, Tanya. I think getting a balance between those quick wins and focusing on those strategic policing challenges. Professor, from your perspective, what does the research indicate in terms of where the focus needs to be from a policing perspective to make sure they're focusing on the right problems?
Yeah, that's a very good question because the evidence is short. AI is relatively new. Of course, technology has always been around. So I think the great questions, the big questions on implementation and the questions of whether it will work with other systems and whether it actually provides the benefit that's being promised, then that model of questioning AI exists and we can talk about that. But the amount of research that you can actually go to understand what works, like impact evaluations, rigor impact evaluations, are actually quite rare. Now, on the one hand, that's a bit alarming because you might be actually implementing interventions or programs that don't work. At the same time, it gives us a lot of promise of something that feels that it works, that it looks like it works, but we don't even understand the implications, the second generation implications of these technologies, and in a positive way. In other words, if there is an implementation that works to the point that it showed promise, and we can test that and show that, and then you can understand the ripple effect onto other systems, onto other people. And we see it quite often: body-worn cameras, CCTV. The effect is not just whether somebody gets stabbed or not because there's a CCTV above them. It's also about investigations, intelligence, gathering information, and so on. And the final thing I'll say, if I may, is that the amount of information from a scientific perspective, whether this is an internal police data exercise or working in collaboration with other partners like academia, the amount of information that now is being produced is just so interesting and provides so much opportunity to understand crime and crime patterns, and of course what can be done to stop it. That is just a new world.
Thank you, Professor. I think that secondary analysis is a really important point. We'll touch on it a little bit further in our discussion. So just to move us on to talk about experimentation with purpose. So for me, a key challenge for how police.ai does testing well, unlocking that capability but not slowing it down. Professor, your research is focused heavily on evaluation techniques and interventions through experimental and quasi-experimental methods. Could you break that down a little for our viewers? What distinguishes a meaningful experiment from just simply running a pilot?
Sure, very important. If you were to go to your doctor and the doctor prescribes you some medication, that medication is based on a series of clinical trials where you tested the effectiveness of that intervention, of that treatment, of that pill. And in engineering, it works the same well when they build bridges and so on. And law enforcement should be the same. It has to be built on a scientific premise where you can test things before you run out and create a whole policy. And when we talk about technology, that's the perfect place to actually consider this. What would you do to test technology? In an ideal situation, you take 100 police forces, police stations, or 100 shifts, or whatever you can measure, and in half of them, you give them your kit, the tool, the AI predictor, the LLM, whatever it is that you think that will benefit law enforcement, and the other half you don't. And then you look at them after a while to see those two groups that are equal to one another, whether there's any differences because of the instrument or the tool that you're trying to implement. And it's relatively more straight over when we talk about evidence in technology because the number of cases, the units is quite large quickly, and you can then understand whether something's working or not. The problem that normally exists in evaluations without this methodology is having a look at the before the implementation and then what happens after. Now, some implementations, the change is so dramatic that you don't need experiments, right? It's just so clear that the value is there that you're just wasting your time. But it's unethical to then say that it's just a change because of your intervention if you're looking at 2 points of time. because it could be a whole different things, right? It could be a new manager, it could be a new technology that's coming in as well, it could be political, it could be so many different parts and culture that it's not necessarily because of the new technology that you have. And then there's a real risk that you're advocating for a technology that may have worked at that slither of time in history where actually there's no effect or maybe have a backfiring effect.
And I think it's worth bringing you in here in that discussion. Obviously, the Netherlands Police AI Lab is highlighted as a really good example of a model that moves from that structured experimentation into live. Can you give us your views in terms of some of the stuff that Professor Ariels touched on, and what separates the stuff that goes into production on scale across the forces versus those that don't?
Yeah, sorry, there was I believe that it's definitely in the right direction. This is exactly the kind of model that we're looking for when we're trying to have something that is so provocative, so delicate and sensitive, but so important and really life game changer for everything in policing, that you take not necessarily a slow approach per se, but you take it in steps where you can assure yourself that what you're doing next is actually effective. So if you're thinking about implementing, large language modeling when you write up reports, or you try to shorten the time that people use to view footage on body-worn cameras, then yeah, you might do that, but you need to experiment because we have actually evidence that that by itself will not reduce the amount of work that it takes to build a case. So there are cases where it's very promising and very assuring and very logical, but ultimately that did not work. So I'll only say that the scientific approach, the evidence-based approach that police are taking, and other forces, of course, as well, we see lots of examples, is quite not only remarkable but important. It's for the better of everybody, not just of productivity and effectiveness, but justice.
Daniel, just to bring you into the conversation, see the Dutch Police AI Lab is held up as a bit of a benchmark of how to experiment well with AI tools and get them into production. What separates those that fail versus those that successfully deploy? What's the difference in the experimenting techniques that you apply?
Well, we have two kinds of experimentation. So you can experiment with the quality of the models to validate the models. For instance, a lot of times we validate models that we develop ourselves, like computer vision models that we develop ourselves versus computer vision models from commercial companies, just to see how good the models are working. As for instance, but also the purpose for the tool itself. Like for instance, we build a model to predict where a suspect who is trying to get away, where he could end up. So we as a police force can focus our attention to go to those places where the suspect is going to end up instead of chasing the suspect. So we have a model for that. So the model could work perfectly, but if in practice you don't catch any criminals, then you just have a model that's working just fine, but doesn't do anything in police perspective by solving a problem that's already there. So you have to look at both things: how good is your model, and how and what is your operational purpose that you want to validate in practice. So the experimenting that is very important. We also have experimentation where we have an operational purpose, but when validating it, we see different operational purposes that weren't in view but were coming in view. So there's a lot of extra operational value that wasn't that people didn't expect, and is also there. So it's also very important to validate it. And also I think it's important because I don't think the police department is getting any cheaper by using AI, it's getting more expensive by using AI. So you have to evaluate if the extra expenses you get from using AI is also worth the operational value of what you're getting for it. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But that's also something that you can decide based on an experiment that you do.
It's really interesting point, and I guess the experimentation doesn't end in the AI lab. Then it's in the field as well to make sure you continue to measure those outcomes. Tanya, Craig, and Tanya, you worked on a few pilots within the contact center. What separates those that work well versus those that don't? What typically is the barriers to promising AI initiatives progressing beyond those proof of concepts?
I think it is it's the outcome. It's the comparison of the before and after. Sort of alluding back to that risk assessment. AI, if that capability was there, it can take a staff member 5 minutes to do a comprehensive, or 5 to 10 minutes to do a comprehensive risk assessment, for instance. Certainly under the model that we were using in my force when I was in West Yorkshire. But yet a call taker will take 10 minutes to deal with a call. So they on average takes 6 calls an hour. So you add in a model that takes 5 to 10 minutes to do, you're reducing their call taking capacity, which in turn is reducing that public service and that performance bottom line of how many calls have you answered within the required time. You bring in a model that improves that and gets results and is identifying the appropriate things, the vulnerabilities, the need for the appropriate grading response, and you get the improved service and that improved identification of vulnerability. And you can measure those things and check those things through auditing. And the auditing itself could potentially ultimately be an AI supported tool. That I think is how you measure and understand. Plus caller victim satisfaction around the service they've received. And the other things those enable is for a person who's speaking to a member of the public to direct their attention entirely on the member of the public and that conversation, rather than thinking, I need to extract this and extract that, and I need to put that into this triage form, and they can just focus on them. So that improved service. So all of those measures, I think, is the way of understanding it. And the user, it has to be easy for the person who's using it. Otherwise it will just fail. If it's an added complication, it must enable their work and not hinder it. And again, that's speaking to the people using it and seeing if it's meeting that need.
It's a really important point, Tanya, not forgetting that rich contact with potential victims, and obviously the user needs are at the heart of it, which brings us nicely on to evidence before scale. So one of the most significant challenges across policing is not the lack of innovation necessarily, but demonstrating that robust evaluation. And the NPCC in particular have highlighted guidelines around this in the AI Policing Covenant. But how do we know an AI agent or tool is generally making those improved policing outcomes rather than the technology that's being deployed that we've referenced briefly in the previous discussion? So, Professor Ariel, many AI projects are measured on accuracy or speed of response, but what are the policing metrics that leaders should really be focusing on?
So we tend to divide the world of outcomes and outputs in measurements. There are some things that the police are producing themselves, if you will, where it's something internal. For example, the number of arrests. For example, how many reports you've written. That by itself is an important outcome in the process, but it's not the outcome that you're hoping for, which is, for example, reduction in crime, which is a reduction, for example, officers' hours and so on, in terms of how busy they are. So these kinds of two measures are really important. And the way to do this is to have a consistent measure in those officers or teams or stations or divisions or departments where you implement this new technology, or old technology for that matter, and then you measure the same thing in the group that did not get exposure to this new technology, or again, the old one. And because you hold data that exists internally, That makes a very big difference compared to doing a study from from scratch, because you can measure victim satisfaction, you can measure different things, but they're not internal data sets, and the other ones are more difficult to get to, right, and to do them right. But the number of reports, the number of arrests, the number of warrants, and so on, all these different things where AI is all this talk about its improvements can be tested easily with internal data that every force would capture anyway. And then you can measure the effect quite quickly. So some of the outcomes you measured, if I may, just to explore some of these, if you will, variables that need to be measured, right? One of them is accuracy. It's still an important question. And then the real way of measuring the answer to this question is to say, compared to what? If AI device, a machine algorithm is 80% accurate, that might be insufficient in terms of some ethical thresholds, but what is the level of accuracy of the human mind? Are we getting to the same figure as well? Based on all the research that we have for a long time, when we compare the predictions and actuarial predictions to human beings, the machines win over and over again because of known biases and known problems, even when they use the same data sets to make the prediction. The point I'm trying to make is that all these different calculations have to be taken into account. And measuring them, such as accuracy, as I said before, speed of recovery, how important this is, of course. We have clear examples where AI can look for a photo in a database much faster than somebody else. In different police forces, there are people that are trained and have skill to sift through CCTV and recognize faces or pictures out of, and that profession may not last long if the AI is more accurate, and seems to be. So the level of the time that it takes to find, the right person obviously is a big saver. But I would also encourage everybody to think about the big outcomes, about whether we're getting a reduction in crime, whether we're getting a reduction in calls for service because of efficiency. Are we getting an increase in convictions? Are we getting an increase in charges and ultimately convictions? These are big questions that are yet to be answered, but I believe they will be answered soon.
Could I just add in there another thing I think which could impact, because I think AI used the right way is complementary, isn't it, to that human interaction. And the world of policing is a place where if you make a wrong decision, it can have really catastrophic impacts and on people, on real people. And one of the biggest reasons for sickness absence across policing is mental health, stress, etc. And I think a big part of people's consideration about returning to work, and certainly me as a leader, when I was there managing people to return to work, I didn't want them to return if they weren't 100% capable and comfortable in doing that role and making those really important decisions. Whereas actually it gives an AI support mechanism used correctly, gives a little bit of room for that fact checking, that if you're not on bringing your A game for whatever reason, which could be you could be at work and you've had a bad morning and you're not quite thinking everything through properly, something's on your mind. And I think, would you ultimately see a bit with the confidence in that and in leaning on those things that actually people could be in work a bit more and it would have that positive impact, which in turn allows for a better response to the public because people are at work, etc. So I think that'll be another thing to watch.
Increasing confidence for users and therefore enhancing their well-being.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, we keep on talking about efficiency and effectiveness, but there's also about the human dimension through the end user. We have some studies in criminology that look at how people perceive and understand automated systems, like, for example, reporting crime online through a website and getting everything automated. And sure, it saves a lot of time and money. I get that, I really do. But if you do surveys with people and interviews with people that go through that system, they're normally not as content and happy about the process. They're not satisfied. Now, in some cases, of course, I'm not going to call everybody that had their bike stolen, right? Because then, so how do you choose cases? Most cases are shut down with no further investigation or no further action because of, demand, and it's just no evidence, and so for the legitimate reasons, right? But the person on the other side is probably not satisfied that's how he's being notified that the case that he actually reported is now not to be taken seriously. So once you call them back, once you reduce the element of no contact and have the human dimension go into play, and you call them back and you tell them why you shut down the case, you're not materially changing the case, but that improves dramatically their level of satisfaction. Point I'm trying to make is that as we move into automation and less of a human being on the other side, we need to understand the need that people have for these elements of the interaction with the police. I'm not saying AI can't do that. Maybe in a few years we'll be savvy enough with technology that the call could be automated through an AI human twin, however you want to call that. But at this present stage, we do need to have a human being helping victims and calls to the police.
You've very politely put your hand up. Did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I recognize what Ariel is saying. We had a similar experience within the Dutch police force. In 2017, when e-commerce fraud was rising, we had a problem within the Dutch police that we didn't exactly know in the front office how to evaluate if there is, for example, really committed a crime or it's just a civil suit. So that was really hard to determine. So we used AI to make that determination. And when we validated the algorithm, it works a lot better than a human could, because people in the front office it's very dynamic. It's not something somebody in the front office really knows, because it's you need a little bit of expertise, and you need to determine how to interpret the law about it. And interesting was that when we started with it, there was a difference in how the police interpreted the law versus how the Department of Justice interpreted the law. So what happened was, people came to the police, want to file a police report. The employee at the front office took the police report while it shouldn't take the police report, and sometimes it rejected a police report while it should take a police report. And after that, there's the DOJ that sometimes said, no, it isn't a police report, and sometimes said it was a police. So a lot of things went wrong. So we use an AI system to solve that problem. And the problem was that we didn't want to get false police reports about e-commerce crimes. The effect was that we still, when we implemented the system, we generated just as much false police reports as before. And so we investigate why do people file police reports when the system is telling them they shouldn't file a police report. And the problem was that, exactly what Ariel said, well, people feel like they are that there's been done an injustice, so people do file a police report in different of what an AI system is telling them. So we just still getting those false police reports. The quality of the system and the quality of the work of the police did get better, because we could better judge when something is an e-commerce crime or not. But the amount of false police reports didn't decrease, because the human factor that was still saying, well, I just feel like I'm being robbed, so I just want to file a police report if the system is telling me yes or no. So that's I think a nice example of what Ariel's talking about is that there are a lot of factors to weigh in, and there are a lot of things to consider while implementing an AI system.
At least the behavior of the people at the other end of it, huh? I'm just going to move us along. So, it builds on some of the points that we've just made: trust, fairness, and legitimacy. So, trust is, for me, the overriding factor when it comes to AI and policing. Craig, I'll come to you first, drawing on your previous role as a Deputy Chief Constable. How do you think leaders should balance effectiveness and public confidence, which are both equally important priorities when it comes to adopting AI? How best to define that balance?
I think this is already been a well-published issue. It's been quite rightly identified very early on as something that is very important for policing as we roll this out, probably more so than any other public service, but not exclusive to policing. But legitimacy in policing is, from my own personal view, is pretty much everything. Having that trust of the public, having the public trust and confidence in everything that policing does is, a central tenet of effective policing delivery. So as we roll, and we know that one of the operational priorities being looked at through police.ai and some of the work that's already been done and is more in more advanced stages around things like facial recognition and how we can use that, and is not without contention, and has not been without contention, is not without challenge. So we're already seeing challenges to legitimacy of uses of AI across policing. That then extends to other groups more broadly within the communities and minority groups, and how well aware we are of the impact on minority groups of data that's contained within policing databases, and whether that then automatically and immediately is producing bias outputs because the data that we're starting from isn't clean, and hasn't been input effectively. It already exists, and we know it's not as good as it could be. So all of those things add up to making legitimacy in how we use this front and center of everything we do, and really important, and as important as anything else we're doing. Because if we get this wrong from the beginning, then it'll be hard to get it right again, and we'll lose confidence. So when, for example, if we take officers, and we talk about outcomes that Ariel was talking about just a minute ago. As I see it, the world of AI, especially in policing, but for everybody generally, is changing daily. Our awareness of its capability is changing daily. Our awareness of its use cases within policing is changing almost daily. We've done some really good things. We've got some really good people heading up the police.ai function. There's been a significant government investment in that, and that is a really positive step. But what we are seeing, aren't we, every day are new headlines of new capability being unlocked within AI. And so for policing to stay on top of that, it's really important. When you look at some of the so how we roll it out nationally versus local fragmentation, shifting away kind of from that isolated force by force approach to a more national approach, is we know that's part of the journey that we're on, but it's really important. And it's really important for our tech companies such as Soprasteria to be, as I said at the very beginning, working in partnership with other tech companies and with policing to ensure that we are delivering what policing needs nationally to deliver an effective and legitimate AI database, if you like, use cases. We know that officers, one of the risks that we face is that officers and teams, many of whom are going to be more advanced in their knowledge and use of AI in their private lives, could quietly be deploying unvetted open source Gen AI tools for their own report writing, etc., which is risking massive data inaccuracies and leaks within policing data and other sensitive data, which is going to form the backbone of other bits of work that policing does, and produces inaccurate and ineffective data, which in and of itself could lead to outcomes and impacts and effects on people that are not right or unfair or disproportionate. And so it kind of goes back to that whole and I heard Daniel talking about it earlier on about validation, and I think there's been a bit of a switch in my thinking recently as well about how some of these tech companies, we've seen recently some publications whereby some really big global companies have had to declare breaches, inaccuracy of their own reporting because of hallucinations within their AI tools. And of course, you've then got, once you start hallucinating, if you don't have the mechanisms in place within your existing databases to manage that, you're then likely to get that data then embedded in your system, so you'll then get secondary hallucinations in things down the line. So I think we'll see a shift, or we are seeing a shift for companies such as ourselves to prioritize validation first and foremost, because the gambit of opportunity that AI can be deployed in policing is so vast. And we know that if we get it wrong in any one of those, or some of those, or all of those deployments, that the impact could be significant on trust and confidence and fairness and legitimacy. That actually prioritizing validation for us is probably something that I think is as important as anything else we're doing in rolling out our kind of AI development.
Yeah, indeed. And there's obviously a lot of discussion around bias in AI. Professor, from a research perspective, how should police improve AI systems are fair, effective, and indeed legitimate?
Yeah, well, you put three big terms on the board: trust, fairness, legitimacy. Each one of them is a different story. I mean, you can find a system to be fair but not legitimate, or vice versa. You can trust the officer but not trust the system, and vice versa. It's a very complicated world. It's also unfair to AI to make this link between whether AI is fair or transparent or legitimate, because AI is has so many different things. I mean, you talking about facial recognition, or you're talking about ChatGPT telling me the answer to my exam? What is it exactly that we're looking at? It's a really vast world. So I think that now we're getting into that generation of research and forward thinking about, okay, AI is the area where, it's in the background and government and all that. But really now let's go deep into what is it that we're trying to address. Are we looking at the legitimacy of police predicting people or places based on algorithms? Or are we talking about the accuracy of facial recognition and whether that creates biases, because the more faces you put in the system in the past, the more types of that face you'll see in the future.
Yeah.
And that, yeah. So and the last thing I'll add is, because you have so many different things to focus, and I suggest we start looking into this as scientists, where they try to unpick precisely the elements that you're asking about and precisely the intervention that you're trying to focus on. So, we've spoken about accuracy of, translation of documents, and then using them for official sort of purposes. These are questions that are, it's one set of questions. And another one, of course, is whether, the whole world of privacy and public domain and open source, information and intelligence that you can gather. There's so many different questions here they try to answer. The last thing I say, I promise, I tend to speak too much. I get excited about things. I think that the question of whether AI is legitimate or trustworthy or not, it's yesterday's question. Today we got to really, go micro and understand specifically the end use and what is that we're trying to achieve.
Specific use case for each type of technology. Yeah. Craig, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to comment on Ariel's point there about AI. What is it that we're looking at legitimately? It offers legitimacy AI, and I think the focus for policing needs to equally be on less about what, of course AI, but what we know that there are frailties within using AI. We know that AI can hallucinate. We know that AI can produce information that might not be 100% accurate because of the information that it's trawling from. So we know that. So I think it becomes incumbent, therefore, on policing leadership because it knows that, to ensure that it has the mechanisms in place to address that. So legitimacy does fall on policing leadership, not on AI. We know that AI can be flawed. We know that putting the human in the loop in relation to decision making is, of course, a sensible thing to do. We know all that. That's kind of well-trodden approaches that we're already taking. But I think as this expands and the speed at which it's expanding, you've got police reform taking place, and we're likely to hear what the future geographic shape of policing might look like in the years to come. We know there's likely to be a national police service. We know there's likely to be more central coordination of procurement, etc., and development, and all of which is very welcome. you still currently have 43 police forces, 43 ICT departments, 43 ICT leads, and so on and so forth. Or you may have certain regional collaborations, but what it's incumbent on police forces to make sure they have the right people with the right skills and the right knowledge to be able to ensure that they've put their own guardrails in place about the use of AI. And I think that is something that we're seeing happen, but I think there's probably some catching up to do.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the points that he's raised are just it's the point that we're looking at a new generation of officers. We look at a new generation of use cases, but ultimately we have individuals now in the force that will be people that write code, that understand machines and big data that we haven't seen as much in the past. I think it will be an extension of the existing departments, but I think it will be quite a big dramatic change in terms of going back into the office to make decisions before you deploy expensive officers out into the streets.
And Daniel, from your perspective, and for me, it's the sort of the $1 million question: how do you maintain that momentum and innovation, but at the same time making sure that you've got the right governance and guardrails and transparency and accountability in there, and you've got that robust process for evaluation?
Legitimacy with, for example, large language models is putting pressure on the Dutch Police Department, because most of the models that are in place are most probably illegitimately made. So that's putting pressure on the police department. Like, can we use those models or can we not use those models? What if we don't use those models? Can we compete with what's happening in the market? So it's a difficult. It's putting a lot of pressure on the police. So if we look in Dutch society, we don't see companies using, for example, legitimate large language models. They're all so that's the first question. How do we go about this in the Dutch police force? Because there aren't usable large language models that are legitimate large language models, but not usable large language models that are legitimate. So that's the first pressure point we have. That's the first hurdle we have to take at a strategic level. So how do we go about? Do we accept that we use those kind of models, or do we don't accept that? That's the first question. Second question about how to go around with trust is knowing the capabilities of large language models. So how does it operate? How can we instruct those models? Is it possible to work without user prompting or stuff like that, or are there other ways to catch those vulnerabilities that those technology has? So how do you go if you know that it's hallucinating? Can you make it transparent? What are the most important things to look at? So how do we prevent automation bias, which is very hard, and we're still figuring out how do you do that? Or you can just say, well, there are use cases within the Dutch police where it's not that big of a problem if it makes mistakes. For instance, while making a timeline for in a detective investigation, those timelines are more used for an indication than as for fact purposing. So if the LLM gets it wrong, it's not really a big problem. And so there are more of those use cases where you can think, well, trust in the outcome is not the most important. It's more for directing purposes. It's also fine. So there's a lot of factors and a lot of tailor-made work to make those things work. When you're talking about Gen AI, that's I think the most difficult part. And what we also see is that the world is moving more to agentic AI, which brings in more problems of challenges. Let's say challenges for the Dutch police to go about. For instance, if it's about fairness, it's about, do we have and I think in England it's the same. If you have 43 different police departments, do they work the same way, or do they work in a different way? For example, within the Dutch police, we have one Dutch police, but 12 regions, and they have difficult way of works. So, for instance, a cold case in Amsterdam has like a different kind of way how you straighten out a case than in another part in Dutch in the Netherlands. So there's a first problem that you don't have a golden standard for how a police process is done within the police force. So it's difficult for an AI to follow those processes if you can't evaluate if it's doing the right thing, and if you don't have an agreement of how it should do things. So there's a lot of challenges for not technology wise, but more organizational wise, which haven't been addressed in history or in the past. So you now are confronted with those challenges when AI comes along, and especially with LLMs, there's a big problem in how you go about that. So we're still also as a Dutch police figuring out how to do that.
Interesting point, and actually brings us nicely along to that coordination element between local innovation, that national capability. You know, if processes aren't the same and common, how do you really effectively deploy some of those agentic workflows? So one of the key ambitions for police.ai is to help coordinate that at the national level, but it raises an important question. So what are the trade-offs between local innovation and greater centralization? Dan, you touched on it briefly there. How have you maintained that experimentation and innovation in some of those pockets throughout Netherlands, but also maintaining that national consistency on standards and making sure that you drive in that strategic direction?
Yeah. So I think both is important. So you have we have 12 regions. So in those 12, sorry, I said it wrong. It's not 12 regions. It's we have 12 departments and 10 regions. What we the local innovation on a regional level is still important, because there is a reason why we are regionally organized. It sometimes has to be with the type of crimes that are committed there, or just how our society is geographically spread out. It also differs, or some regions are across the border, so it enables some kind of form of crime that's not somewhere else. So you have to have local innovation, and you have to have national innovation, because we are one Dutch national police. So effectively, everybody has to be treated the same, and the law in our country is the same. So some problems you can centralize and focus on in a centralized way, and some innovations there are sometimes case bounded or just regional bounded. So we have to do both. We as a Dutch police force as a Dutch AI organization, which focus on the national problems which we're trying to solve with AI. And in the region, we have more data scientists and innovators that are focused on regional crime, use case of case-bound problems with AI. And sometimes those case-bound innovations lead to national innovations. And that's how we go about it right now. And that's, yeah. So we have also centralized our IT infrastructure, so we can optimize and utilize models. Like, for instance, large language models. It's very easy to host a large language model. It's getting easier with today, every day, to host a large language model. But you don't want everybody downloading their own large language model to solve a problem. You want to centralize a large language model, and, for instance, offer a service like large language model as a service, so that everybody uses the large language model from the same place, where you have to invest in one place for your infrastructure. So keeping costs low and optimizing, and keeping also legitimacy in place by saying these are the models we are working with as Dutch police, and these are the models we don't work. So if we offer them, those are the use cases, those are the models we use also in the regions. So you can bring it together in that way.
I wanted to move us along to slightly move away from the technology itself to looking at how to build that broader capability that will enable scale, because it's an argument that with the technology there, it's available, but success will really depend on how police forces and policing organisations change how they operate, use their data, how they collaborate, and how they create that culture of user adoption. So, open question to the panel: if police.ai is to be successful, what capabilities and not technologies does police need to develop that it lacks today? Anyone want to
If I
come in
may,
on that one?
yeah, sure. If I may start, if that's okay with everybody. I just think that going back to the point of experimentation, piloting, testing things out, and making things very transparent, how it's been done, how it's been measured, what do we mean by success? Provide the public, and the word public here could be the general public or the public of decision makers, about the effectiveness and about the drawbacks of each instrument that you're trying to implement. The more evaluation we have, just like in other professions, the more the people will trust it. In places where technologies have been implemented and it was all very hush hush, then people automatically are concerned. This shouldn't be. AI by itself is, it's a fantastic instrument. It's a fantastic tool. The way that it's being used is what might cause problems in terms of how much people would actually be able to use it and want to use it. And as it was discussed before, I said before, the different kinds of end users. There's officers out in the field, and how are they going to use that, if at all? And there's everything that goes in the back in the HQ, with planning and prevention and things that are, as if you will, helping making the decision of how to mobilize, 84% or 85% of your, resources out there, rather than to tell them just go aimlessly walk about and prevent. So I think, to answer your question, I'm sorry for taking my time, is that if you want to build capacity, you prove it slowly by showing people the value of it. We've seen this with body-worn cameras, we see this with CCTV, you see this with radios. We forget that the radios in policing, not everybody took up on radios at the beginning, as we know, but ultimately, when you see the value of this and practice on your own, then you can see the value of this against what you've done before, the business as usual. And that's how you can spark a revolution of interest in end users to take up on these different sort of instruments and different sorts of algorithms and codes that are supposed to help society and help policing do a lot better.
You've mentioned end users a bit. From your perspective, do you think the literacy is there, and is that culture of adoption ready to start taking up and using these tools?
Yes. Look, I mean, if you ask the average Google user, and I hope I'm not providing a commercial bid for Google, it's a very simple tool. It's one line. You punch in a question, and all the wonderful things come back in the background, and then you get the answer that you wanted. AI needs to think about the world of policing the same. Make it simple. And the simpler it is for the end user, the less it depends on the end user, the more it will be useful to the end user. That's a simple sort of if you will, like an equation of how you make something scalable. The more the more things I have to punch, the more time I have to take to make things different from what I did just a moment ago for 20 years. That's how you'll be successful. It's like, oh, it turns out by itself. Oh, it dictates by itself. I don't have to do anything. I like it. But if you start asking me to do different things, then I'll do different things and it'll probably backfire.
Spring on that one, you've spoken about end users in the control room a bit. Do you think the literacy is there? Do you think the culture is there for AI adoption?
I think there's a hesitancy around it, which is a bit ironic when you think about it, because people really do embrace it in their personal life. But I think it's that hesitancy when people have been trained to make their own decisions and empowered to make their own decisions and to stand by them and to justify them, that then here comes this system to make your decision. And I think that's where it would need to really be sort of affirmed with staff that it's there to support decision making. And I think that's what any one of us would want really, both as members of the public and in our professions. We want something to enhance what people do, not to take over, and none of us would want to take that human interaction away. And I think that would be the importance, that here is a tool to help you do your job and make you more efficient. And I think that messaging will be really important, as well as that usability. I've seen it time and time again. If you bring in something complex, it just won't take off. You're just fighting a battle from the beginning to get people to embrace it. So it needs to be, like you say, the wonder of Google is it is a simple line, and it needs to be really something that doesn't feel like a hindrance from the word go. It's all right sitting and thinking, well, in a couple of weeks they'll be used to it, but they've got to get through those couple of weeks and buy in. They'll, staff talk to each other, they say, and people tend to err towards, oh, this happened, it didn't do this right. And that's where it's got to be so usable and like I say, just sold to them in the right way as that performance enhancer, and supporting them and protecting them around their decision making.
Tanya, one last theme I wanted to touch on before we run out of time was the role of AI labs in all of this. So, Daniel, from your perspective, what problems does an AI lab solve that those traditional digital transformation approaches often struggle to address? What's the difference between running an AI lab and not, essentially?
Yeah, well, so I'm a manager of the project AI project team, and we work together with the Dutch National AI Lab. And the role of the AI Lab is to work in Dutch Police is we're working together with Dutch universities to study AI for police purposes, because there's a lot of knowledge to gain from science instead of the market. You see, the market focuses now mostly on generative AI, but there are a lot of forms of AI that are also very useful within the Dutch police force. So we have a broad capability of AI tools, of AI forms that we can utilize with universities. That's for one part. The other part is that we can validate models ourselves and benchmark our models or models from other companies. So that also makes us a smart buyer when we want to buy in algorithms from companies, or when we develop them ourselves. So that's a little bit the role of our AI lab is utilized. For instance, with the selection of LLMs, how do you decide which LLM is best for your own company? How do you benchmark those LLMs? Most LLMs is maybe not a problem for the English police force, but for the Dutch police force, you have to measure them in how good do they act in, can they speak Dutch? And how do you test them to benchmark them in the Dutch language for stuff like that? I think in English it's not that big of a problem with LLMs, but for the Dutch language, it's Dutch.
Yeah.
So we stuff like that we can benchmark, like first time to token, transparency, stuff like that. We can all benchmark those. We can make benchmarks for the Dutch police to evaluate those models and to select the right models for the right purpose.
Good point. And Craig, from your perspective, AI labs becoming not simply that centre for innovation, but what's your view on how they become that operational delivery engine?
Yeah, I think I'd echo a lot of what we've already heard there, actually, and from what Daniel evidences is being done in the Netherlands. But I think just to kind of capture from my personal experience lens and what I would like if I was still in policing now, what I would like to be doing, I think the labs can offer the opportunity to some control over use case development. I think Daniel's talked about it. I think they offer some control over standardized testing, benchmarking, and validation, and I think they can help avoid as we're going out into the market more broadly and developing things, it can kind of avoid some of the black box procurement that otherwise isn't so attractive, and comes with risk. So I think that kind of localized that providing that function will enable to keep policing to keep consistent, and not be rushing off 43 times, 12 times, 10 times, whatever way it looks like, to just do developing bits of work that are not reinventing, misprocuring, that sort of thing. So I think there's an opportunity. I think that the labs present that, and then they allow that. They will then allow the connection between the national consistency and some sort of local experimentation, because it would be done in a more controlled way. And I think the two things can then have touch points that enable themselves to work and speak, and to avoid the creation of products that are duplication or aren't necessary. So I think kind of from that perspective, and I think finally going for me, it's just that also the reiteration of the AI, by focusing on the AI labs and establishing AI labs to do that, will also allow policing to develop some consistency around the things I talked about a bit earlier on, which is around some of the more developing use cases and identifying opportunities within some of the other systems that they have, so finance, HR, duties management, and identifying opportunities within them. I think there's a real big opportunity there to galvanize that data, clean that data up, and galvanize it, and harness it, and use AI within it to help operational outcomes. And also, I guess, so sort of finally, I'm just going to say the same point again, but really it's about allowing forces to develop the tools they need now and the people they need now to keep up with the pace of change, to ensure they're on the right track now, because otherwise, they'll be playing catch up again in 6 months' time, or 12 months' time, or 18 months' time. So the development and the rolling out of AI labs and the consistency of doing things at scale, as per the last conversation, the forces really need to prioritize getting people with the right skill set in to keep them working to a strategy and a plan that is aligned to the national, aligned to the College of Policing, aligned to the police.ai lab, and aligned to the covenant, etc., so that what they're doing is consistent with the way it's going to go and the way it's going to be in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years time. And I think that the AI labs will help forces to be able to do that.
To close out, and ask you each to grab your crystal ball and look ahead 10 years. It's 2036, and AI is now part of policing, and it's a trusted, integral, routine part of it. What's the biggest thing that has changed for the public and for officers and for policing itself? What must we start doing today to make that future reality? So let's do a quick fast fire round, one lesson each, I think, from each of you. Tanya, do you want to go first?
I think the one thing I'd like to see is that us really learning lessons from national reviews. I think the most prevalent thing I can think of is Baby P. 13 years later, some of those things were repeated in the Star Hobson case, because we've not managed to embed those lessons nationally. And I think that's where AI could play a really critical role in helping that. And there would be a lot of, less severe benefits as a result if that was the target. And I think to sort of enable it now, I think there probably needs to be some consideration to legislation, which would bring some public confidence, as well as user confidence as well, and probably consideration to things like community engagement playing a part in its development, and using those public policing forums to talk about the systems that are implemented.
I've not spoken about policy or community engagement. Professor Earl, what would be your key takeaway?
Well, for 2036, who can predict the future? It's moving so fast. I mean, predictive analytics, I think, are going to really skyrocket. They're going to get a lot more accuracy. We'll see systems connected to other systems that will provide you more accuracy with more variables into those algorithms, and a reduction in false positives as well as false negatives. I think anything with the wearable world, body-worn cameras, integrating with other systems is going to take it to a whole new place, because we see the benefits already, and I think it's just sparking up understanding behavioral cues, and so on. So the interaction between law enforcement and policing using AI will be a lot smoother because they understand what they're getting into. There are going to be a lot of questions about the workplace. We're going to have to restructure it in many ways. The pool of applicants is going to be smaller, but the types of jobs that we now have are for AI and AI related jobs. It's just going to dramatically increase, I think, like it does everywhere else. And that is important that we keep up the pace. And finally, I think even in 2036, the question of trust and transparency and issues, broader questions with policing in terms of, biases and so on, will still linger on because technology is not a panacea. It's not supposed to can help all social ailments, but it's definitely there to help.
Pastor Greg, what's your crystal ball telling you?
I think by 2036 we'll see a restructured policing. I think we'll see national consistent development, testing, validation, procurement. I think we're then likely to see expanding it further. It would be great to see that we've taken the developments that policing's made in utilising this into the multi-agency public protection environment. So we're working together across agencies, across local authorities, and with the private sector to be using AI tools to really protect the public in a much more meaningful way, because we'll be sharing information and using that AI cross sector. I think that'll be really good. And policing itself will be the infrastructure in policing will enable it to be innovating in this space, but also keeping up with the pace of change and therefore effectively staying ahead of what it needs to do in terms of its development.
Okay, last word from you, Daniel.
Well, always a difficult question where you end up in 2036 with AI. Actually, we're focusing on where is AI heading the next 6 months, because every time we talk about it, things are changed and there's a lot of change happening. So I think it's really hard to say where we are at 2036. I think in the short term, what we all need, I think, for Dutch police is a more lean governance, because AI is moving so fast that our governance can't keep up with all the changes. Everything you bring for decision making is old. So that's how fast everything is going. So I think in 2036 we have figured out how to implement and think about AI in a more lean way. But how AI looks within the Dutch police, really don't know. There's a lot coming in the next 10 years that's unpredictable. So everything you think about now could be old in just a few months.
Yeah, really good point. It's probably not wise to speculate too far in the future. Let's focus on the near and the now. So thank you all for your thoughts and insights. Today's discussion has highlighted the challenge facing policing isn't simply about adopting AI. It's about ensuring that AI delivers meaningful outcomes, earns public trust, and scales responsibly across policing. So whether we've been discussing experimentation, evidence, governance, or leadership, for me a common theme has emerged. Success will depend on how effectively we bring together policing, academia, and industry to learn, evaluate, adopt, and scale. The future of policing won't be defined by the AI systems we built. It'll be defined by the outcomes we achieve for victims, communities, and officers. So a big thank you to our panelists for your insightful contributions. If you want to learn more about Sopra Steria's AI capabilities, you can check out our AI Lab Hub via the QR code on your screen at the moment. And thanks very much for watching.